Crime and punishment are nearly as old as humanity itself. In 16th century Europe, there was plenty of crime and punishment to satiate even the most sadistic individuals on both sides of the law. Taking English King Henry VIII, for example, during his early mid-16th century reign, it is estimated that the Tudor king had nearly 72,000 people executed for capital crimes, including his own wife, Anne Boleyn. And for England, there were around 220 crimes eligible for the death penalty by the 1700s. In mainland Europe, one of the largest threats which terrorized the countryside and dark roads of the wilderness were the masses of murderous gangs moving across the terrain. Highway robbery, murder, sexual assault, and kidnapping were all very real risks travelers faced when venturing away from cities, not to mention the hard, arduous journeys most contended with, enduring hunger and exposure to the elements while on foot or horseback, meaning that most who traveled were either merchants or nobles, two groups of citizens who enjoyed the luxury of having ample resources for the long road ahead, making them prime targets for violent bandits. Many were preyed upon and murdered by these nomadic thieves, behaviors we today would recognize as those of a textbook serial killer. There were a number of particularly notorious bandits operating in Europe during the 1500s. They captured the public's attention in ways that our attention has been captured in more contemporary times. Among these serial killers in 16th century Europe, who left bodies and blood in their wake, was one whose deeds were so cruel and detached from any sense of humanity that through time, their persona has crossed over somewhere between reality and myth. This is the tale of Christman Genipperteinga, the Devil of Fraßberg, a true horror in history. Reportedly hailing from Kerpen, just 2 miles outside modern-day Cologne in Germany, Christman Genipperteinga was born some time before the year 1569, an exact date unknown among scholars. What is known is that in the years spanning the 16th century in Germany, referred to as Almany in the late Middle Ages, a new dark terror was rising on the roads and footpaths outside fortified city walls. Murder and robbery were becoming a lucrative business for those willing to dirty their hands. Many of these lurid criminals had in fact seen plenty of bloodshed and had become desensitized to violence, being former soldiers and mercenaries, which resorted to banditry. For instance, in the late 15th century, the territories that would become modern-day Germany saw the formation of a special militaristic force known as the Landsknechte, at the behest of Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. Defending his wife's lands in the Burgundian Wars, Maximilian saw the efficiency of the Swiss Confederacy pikemen with their impenetrable battle formations and adept use of the pike. He swiftly decreed that a similar force be formed in the interest of security for the Germanic lands which he reigned over. The Landsknechte were swords for hire, able to make better wages than more domestic employment, like that of the city's stonemason, one of the more coveted jobs of the time. The Landsknechte became a vital fighting force for the Holy Roman Empire, serving in many battles over the decades until their peak in the early 1500s. A prestigious and well-trained army of mercenaries, the Landsknechte held numerous ranks such as Doppelsoldners, elite warriors who often flanked the pikemen, wielding longswords, halberds, and the vicious Zweihänder. But despite their skill in eye-popping attire, the Landsknechte could be fickle with their duties, sometimes launching mutinies against their commanding officers when pay was delayed or withheld. Infighting was also a risk should division within the ranks boil over. One particularly damaging event in the Landsknechte's image was the 1527 sacking of Rome, a whirlwind of mass murder, sexual assault, and looting so awful, we could dedicate an entire episode to the tribulations the civilian population of Rome suffered under the invading Landsknechte army. Such were the dangers of employing this imposing military force, and as the years went on, Germanic populations enjoyed a period of exponential growth, with more individuals joining mercenary groups such as the Landsknechte. As the population grew, so too did the cost of living, while wages as a sellsword remained unchanged. This not only spurred many mercenaries to seek other means of financial income, but also ruined the exclusive nature of joining a once prestigious fighting force, a mixture of all corners of society, picking up arms and joining the ranks, criminals included. The days of the Landsknechte were coming to a close, and the finances to fund them dried up, forcing this increasingly dishonorable organization of mercs to branch out into their own ragtag companies of killers and thieves. Disillusioned warriors from other armies were doing the same, as wages were stifled, tempting any who knew their way around a blade to seek immoral means of wealth. Even those born of noble standing were known to cavort with these gangs, bastards without an inheritance, believing they had no other choice than to spill blood for coin, their family fortune forever out of reach. And so the roads became ever darker by the presence of these roadside devils. And it was our devil in question, Christman Genipperteinga, who was believed to have originated from such a background as the Landsknechte, or even the bastard children of the aristocracy, looking to blaze their own trail in the world by the edge of a sword. Within the latter decades of the 16th century, the northern hemisphere of the Earth lay in what some climatologists have referred to as the peak of what has come to be known as the Little Ice Age, a period of drastic climatic cooling that lasted for around 550 years. In the territories of what would come to be known as Germany, life grew harder from the cold. Crop failures were not uncommon in the least, leading to famine and disease in many places. So too suffered the wilderness. As small game came by less and less food, the repercussions were felt throughout the food chain. Wolves, for instance, grew more ravenous, and as their natural prey diminished, other options had to be considered. In tandem with the Little Ice Age, the European continent saw devastating wars, which left fields of corpses to the buzzards. But the winged scavengers were the only mouths to find food in the remnants of battle. Wolves found sustenance from the dead, growing an acquired fondness for the smell and taste of human flesh. Wolf attacks in the Alpine Germanic lands became a genuine threat. As encounters between humans and wolves became more frequent, an outbreak of rabies followed, the wolves passing the terrible disease onto humans, symptoms including aggression and psychosis, fueling the fear and belief of werewolves in the region. And as children were small, often found working out in fields or wandering the tree line gathering firewood, they were the most targeted prey. Though wary travelers assuredly still kept their eyes peeled and their ears open, while trekking along woodland roads, perhaps imagining, with dread, a hungry pack of wolves watching them from some cave up the mountainside. And within a cave, a wolf was reported to reside, a wolf in human skin. Emerging from the marauding hordes of killer thieves, Christman Genipperteinga is said to have made a home in a complex of caverns in the highlands of Fraßberg. From there, the rogue was said to have an expansive view of many roads networking the countryside, a perfect vantage point for scouting targets. Christman outfitted his cave to resemble the interior of any other house, indicating that he had no intention of a temporary hideout, but instead, a desire to put down stakes and settle in. Spotting a target, the wolf approached from his cave. German travelers, French travelers, it made no difference to Christman. He would ambush and take the life from his prey, possibly with a Katzbalger, or cat skinner, a standard mercenary sidearm of the time, a short sword, useful for when the enemy got too close. Any valuables possessed by the corpses he'd hoard in his cave. Like other thieves, Christman would work with like-minded miscreants, leading his very own gang of associates. However, it was said that even his partners in crime were not safe from his malice. Following a robbery, Christman and company would retreat to his cave. There, he reportedly served his comrades poisoned food and drink, before looting their corpses and disposing of their remains in a mine shaft. As Christman left his own bloody wake in the world, other contemporary serial killers were operating in the area. In fact, a rash of executions of serial killers took place in the latter half of the 16th century in parts of Europe. Peter Stump was an infamous serial killer whose accusations of cannibalism were so terrible, authorities believed him to be a werewolf. The Werewolf of Bedburg, as Stump came to be known, was brutally executed on the wheel and burned for his crimes in 1589, his severed head pinned over the corpse of a wolf. It wasn't uncommon during the time to draw fantastical confessions out of accused murderers under torture. Many would concede to having made deals with the devil, having intimate relations with demons, and being ravenous werewolves. Such details chronicled would often be included in the reports of these criminals. But no details of the sort were added in the 1581 account of Christman Genipperteinga. The reporting of his crimes were straightforward and unflinching. There was no mention of demons or black magic. There were only his awful crimes. Not long after Genipperteinga established his cave of horrors in Fraßberg, a young woman who lived with her father, a barrel maker on the Rhine River, was traveling to Trier to visit relatives. Along the way, she was set upon by Christman. Initially intending to simply murder and rob her, the Devil of Fraßberg instead forced the woman, under pain of death, to return with him to his cave. Nothing could prepare the terrified woman for the long, living nightmare she was about to endure. Christman is said to have chained the woman to a wall in the cave, and to have made further death threats towards her, in the event that she might consider fleeing. And so this horrifying coupling would continue, year after year, as the Fraßberg Devil continued his killing and looting spree in the region. 7 whole years are said to have gone by, as the young woman remained captive, where she would bear him several children, all of which he allegedly murdered shortly after their birth. And if the torment of such a cruel and evil act such as infanticide was not enough, it is reported that Christman took the infants' bodies and hung them up in a tree, where their limbs and eventually their skeletal remains would swing in the breeze, for their bereaved mother to see. Genipperteinga is quoted as having remarked at the ghastly sight, quote, "Dance, dear little children, dance. Genipperteinga, your father, is making the dance for you." Following 7 years of torturous existence under the bloody thumb of Christman Genipperteinga, the young woman was able to convince her abductor of allowing her to finally visit family in the nearby town. Not uncommon in more liberally documented and contemporary cases of abduction, the abductor may feel they've exalted enough control and power over their victim that even when they aren't around, the victim is still too frightened to save themselves. This seems to have been the case for Christman, having controlled his captive for so many years. But the woman did not let the opportunity go to waste. It's unclear as to how exactly she alerted authorities, with some accounts saying she broke down in tears in the town square, and it wasn't until a passerby tried to console her that she explained her hellish ordeal, while other accounts say she found her family and pleaded to them for help. Whatever the circumstances, the woman devised a plan with the town constables. She would return to the cave, but not without leaving a trail for authorities to follow, in the form of peas dropped along the road and pathways. Having returned, she was able to calm Genipperteinga with plenty of strong wine and soothing words, inducing him into a slumber. It was at this point that around 30 armed guards moved in on the oblivious Fraßberg Devil and arrested him. Removing him from his cave network, the guards searched the premises, finding all sorts of loot pried from the hands and bodies of his victims. Wine, food, expensive clothing, weapons, money, and even full suits of armor. It was a macabre exhibition of trophies and fortunes hoarded by a serial killer. And among the stolen goods were Christman's own personal belongings, including a journal, accounting for every one of his murders, allegedly 964 in all, just short of what he had detailed as his ultimate goal, 1,000 victims. An astounding figure that, if indeed true, would make Christman Genipperteinga the most deadly serial killer in recorded German history. For his crimes of murder and robbery, the Devil of Fraßberg was sentenced to execution on the breaking wheel on June 17, 1581. Tied to a large wagon wheel, his bones were smashed, the broken remains wrapped around the spokes. It's reported that Christman was then kept alive on the wheel by his executioner for a total of 9 days, extending his agony until he finally expired. The only solid account we have of Christman Genipperteinga and his unprecedented murder spree is from a series of pamphlets published by one Caspar Herber, titled Terrible New Tidings About a Murderer Named Christman. This is the only known publication from Herber, and even then, it is thought to be a reprint from earlier pamphlets distributed in the region, so the original author is unknown. What is known is that reports of murders and gangs of thieves were reaching a fever pitch in the 1580s. From the Werewolf of Bedburg, Peter Stumpf, mentioned earlier, to other notorious gang leaders and highwaymen pillaging the countryside. Furthermore, the recent advent of the printing press was still invigorating aspiring publishers who would jump at the chance to print just about anything in order to showcase their business and put their name in people's mouths. With this in mind, the real truth surrounding Christman Genipperteinga is put into question. Something seems to have occurred relating to the individual. His name would show up in further chronicles over the centuries, up until the 1700s, the accounting of his evil deeds taking on new, more illustrious forms. While the earliest accounts make no mention of the supernatural, later reports would say Christman made a deal with the devil, gaining the power of invisibility, while others would proclaim he encountered dwarves in the caves, giving him access to their magical tools and otherworldly skills in craftsmanship. Future publishings embellished Genipperteinga's crimes even further, proclaiming that not only did he kill his victims, but ate them too, including his own children. This detail in particular, a possible inspiration taken from the Titan Cronus, who in Greek mythology ate his own children following their birth, out of fear that they would overthrow his power. So in relation to the extent of Genipperteinga's crimes, including the staggering body count resulting from his 13-year murder spree, any conclusions concerning the validity of such claims should be made with a very large grain of salt. That isn't to say that grotesque death tolls have not been laid bare by other serial killers before, a much more recent example being Colombian serial killer Luis Garavito, or the Beast, who was proven to have murdered 193 people, mostly children, between the years 1992 and 1999, though the actual death toll is thought to be more than 300 in total. So while Christman's astronomical claim of having murdered nearly 1,000 people seems unbelievable, it is not out of the realm of possibility. Whether he was a flesh-and-blood monstrous killer, or a foreboding myth conjured up by the very real terror felt by people at the presence of bloodthirsty gangs roaming 16th century Europe, the tale of Christman Genipperteinga inarguably calls attention to the depths of violence and depravity which existed in Europe during the end of the late Middle Ages and the dawn of the early modern period, making the Devil of Fraßberg a true horror in history. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, especially if you are new to the channel. Thanks for watching Horrors in History.